Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Business Growth on Purpose. I'm your host, Jose Palomino, and today I'll be interviewing Dan Allford of ARC Specialties. And Dan is a roboticist, so check that out. He actually makes robots for a living. His company specializes in that. And we're going to learn a little bit about robots, but more importantly, a lot about how to be nimble in changing economies. This is an important conversation with Dan as he joins us today. So listen closely at the principles of flexibility, being nimble, responding to the changes in markets. And Dan's been successful doing this for close to 40 years. So it's worth listening to right now. Well, welcome, Dan, to Business Growth on Purpose. I should say welcome back. This is your second time on our show.
Indeed. I appreciate you having me back a second time. The first one must have gone well.
It certainly did. It certainly did. And it's for those listening, it's in our archives. You can find that at valueprop.com under the podcast, and you'll see all the episodes we have there, including a prior interview with Dan. So Dan, just for people maybe listening to you on our show for the first time, if you could just tell us for context sake, what you do and who you do it for.
I call myself a roboticist since 1983. That's when I started my company in my garage. We've grown quite a bit. We now have 100,000 square feet of manufacturing and 65 people building machines that are used to make things. And so what we do is we build the machines that build the stuff that the culture needs, and that's everything from rockets to electric cars to oil field stuff. And we have machines operating in 32 countries at this point. So I'm 64 years old. It took me this long to grow this much, but it's been a great ride.
Wow. Well, I love the term, and I don't think I've ever had a guest quite self-identify as a roboticist. So that sounds really good. I grew up with like 2001: A Space Odyssey and HAL and all of that. So it's kind of cool.
Guess where I started? It was Isaac Asimov, and that's his word. So we're going to use Isaac's words.
All right. So what are the three rules of robotics, right? Of the positronic brain. You haven't gotten to the positronic brain yet, though, I don't think.
No, only rule my robots have to follow is the first rule, which says that they must obey humans, and that's an easy gig for me.
Okay. Well, what's interesting is, and I love the way you put it, you make the machines that make the machines, right? That we buy ultimately, right? And you do it across a wide variety of industries as well, which I find fascinating. Obviously you've done what you've done very well, and you've developed this reputation, 32 countries and all of that. But in that time, and we're right now in the middle as we speak of a lot of uncertainty about the economy. The last couple of years because of the pandemic. Prior to that, and not that far back, you had the Great Recession. And prior to that, you had 9/11 and what that meant to the country. So it seems like every 5, 6, 7 years, major tumult happens. And yet here you are, you keep on ticking, right? So my question to you is, how have you been able to kind of establish a company that can be as agile or nimble as it seems you've done for your business? Because you've moved from industry, you've moved into different industries at different times. I would love to hear just a little bit more about how you've done that.
Well, first off, don't give me too much credit. The fear of failure is a powerful motivator. And so, none of us are immune to business cycles. So you can either live and die by whatever business you are used to working with, the one that you're comfortable with, or you can reach out a little bit further and try to find where your technology can apply to other industries. And that's precisely what we do, because like one of my salesmen, he said, don't give me credit for the good times because you'll blame me for the bad. Everything is cyclical. And so, but the good news is when your industry's down, there's another one that's probably up. And a great example of that is, a lot of the stuff that you and I talk about is oil field, right? And when the oil field's down, because prices are cheap, that means the plastics industry is up. So what do? We go off to the plastic industry, and then we work on the extrusion machines and things such as that. And that kind of balances stuff. It's never quite that easy. Frequently, you have to cast the net a little further into completely different industries to find somebody that's on an upward business cycle.
And I love the way those two industries, because I actually work with a firm that does a lot of work in plastic, and with petroleum prices going up, it it felt like, gee, our project's going to get killed because plastic is petroleum based, of course.
Right.
But what they actually help people do is figure out how to use less plastic in manufacturing. So I said, well, that's actually an opportunity. Yes, some projects will get killed, but others that have to stay alive, they can figure that out. So that I love that idea of that kind of agility. So Dan, aside from you having that in your hard wiring, like how you look at the world, how you look at your business, how have you been able to have you been able to help your teammates, your employees? You said you have like 65 staff. So how do you hire people that have that kind of agile thinking, or do they become that way once they work with you?
Wow, that's hard to say. You tend to hire people that you like, right? And so that's what my team is already. They're that kind of people, but then they also see the corporate culture. And so, we during COVID, it's a great example. Oil field went down, and that's Houston, and business in general went down. That's not good. And so we had to do something. And so in that case, we reached out to the electric car industry, because that still was politically correct, and everybody likes electric cars. So we worked in that industry for a while, put over a dozen robots into those plants. And the way we found that job is kind of revealing. And I guess that's might be the lesson for your listeners today is how did we get into the electric car business? It's because we do a good job in other industries. And there's a process used in industry called plasma cutting. Only a few folks do it in 3 dimensions, and that's what we do. And it's because of that reputation of being able to plasma cut in 3 dimensions, all of a sudden we're credible in an industry where we never worked before. So we're building electric cars now.
So Dan, tell me a little bit. I'm kind of curious, just because it sounds really cutting edge, just plasma cutting in 3 dimensions. Just describe that process a little bit.
You got to go all the way back to NASA testing heat-resistant materials way back in the 60s. So they needed something to create extremely high heat source. And so plasma is the 4th state of matter. You generate it with an electric arc. And then a couple of guys left NASA to develop a cutting process based on plasma. And they ended up close to each other up in the Northeast and came up with a couple of plasma cutting companies. And so plasma allows you to cut stuff that you can't cut with oxyacetylene. It's getting into the weeds here, but plasma is a great process, but everybody cuts flat. So you can buy machines from 100 different companies that will cut flat parts, and then you bend them from there. But what if you want to cut 3-dimensional parts? Now you need a 6-axis robot. And so that's where we bring to the table. We understand the plasma technology. We understand 6-axis robot. You put the two together, lo and behold, you get 3-dimensional cutting.
Wow. So, and the application for that is not limited to one industry, is your broader point.
No, anything you can imagine that you want to cut in 3 dimensions, we can help you with. So it's really much more powerful. It's just that the industry originally started out cutting everything flat, but the world's not flat,
Right. That's for sure. Well, one thing that, so I'm thinking about this. So you're in the mid-market as a company, right? 65 employees. So you're not Boeing, right? On the other extreme, for example, as a manufacturer. And yet you have this reputation, these specialized, robots, and they can do different things. How much of what you build is because a customer tells you, can you build X for us? And how much is it your team starts like noodling things on the whiteboard and say, what would happen if we did this?
It depends on the business cycle. But, my tagline on all my posts are ARC Specialties thrives on problems, send us yours. And that's always the best bet. If we can get somebody to say, hey, how do you solve this problem? How do you cut 3-dimensional, with plasma? Then we're off the races, because you don't have to identify an end user. They came to you. Mm-hmm. But then when times are slow and industry's slow, then that's why I got a laboratory. We go play in the lab. And I like to tell people that my golden rule is 10-6-2. Out of every 10 ideas we go to the lab with, 6 of them actually work and 2 of them sell.
Okay.
And so that's, I don't know, That could be anything from 20% or more. In downtimes, we're having to invent stuff and then try to find somebody that's interested in it. So that's what happens more so in downtimes. In that case, it's our idea, and then we go find people that might utilize it. But it's truly a function of the business cycle.
Wow. Well, the reason I asked that is, over the years we've been working now for, I guess, close to 17 years now, mostly with companies in the small to mid market in manufacturing or industrial services. And they often don't think at that size that it's their place in a way to think about R&D things. They're always just reacting to their customer base, sometimes their biggest single customer, whatever they say jump, they say, oh, hi. And it's just the nature of that kind of business. So I love the fact that even at your size company, you will, again, depending on the business cycle, you will actually take some time and resource and energy and say, like, let's create something. Let's create some opportunities for ourselves. And I love that scrappiness there. So when you look at that, and I love the 10-6-2, right? So the whole idea that not every idea is going to be a home run, right? But when you go to market, especially with something, maybe companies that haven't heard of you before, haven't dealt with you before. Now we're in this, like, we hope post-COVID kind of time, but everybody's gone on Zoom and, they say, well, people aren't meeting or people kind of want to meet and so on. What do you see different in terms of the marketing business development effort for a company your size to be successful compared to, let's say, even 3 years ago?
Well, and it's all the internet, I would say. But the good news is there's so many ways you can market yourself without really incurring any expense. This is a perfect example. That's why I appreciate you having me on the podcast. Somebody might hear something, this might, stimulate some thought. And so, whenever I'm invited to be on podcasts, I tend to jump at the chance. I take any chance I can to speak in public. You'll find that all the professional societies need technical speakers. And so I'll fly all over the country on my own nickel to give technical presentations, and I will tailor those to the end users. I'm working on an article. I'm actually rewriting an article right now that's going in the welding journal. That's the one, once again, free stuff. And then you add to that social media like LinkedIn and such, and then even print journalism. What I found is if you contact a reporter, that's writing some things that you find interesting and establish a relationship, lo and behold, they may come over and give you a talk too. We've gotten into a lot of publications locally here in Houston that way. So you got to do all these things. There is no one, magic bullet that's going to solve it.
No.
No, and I guess the one thing I'll throw in there that does add a little bit of money is trade shows. Maybe you might call me a dinosaur, but I think trade shows are still a viable technique. To do it cheap, you can work them from the floor.
Right.
You go to the shore, work, that way you don't have to have a booth, but we tend to have booths. We just finished a good show here in Houston called the Offshore Technology Conference. We had a few people that show up and said, wow, I didn't know you were doing that. And, I got a big grin on my face and thought, wow, we just paid for the booth.
Right. Well, it's interesting you mentioned trade shows because I've been asked, and I'm part of Manufacturing Masters, and I've spoken on that specific issue as part of their faculty. And I would say, trade show can be great if you have a plan. What I see people do all too often is their plan is show up or like just have the booth, and so they spend the money on the booth, they fly everybody there, and they almost make it more like a company retreat almost. And they don't really have a plan. Like I would ask the question, so what are you going to do with the cards you've collected? What's the plan when you get back? Well, we'll figure that out. Well, the fact that you come back, you get busy, nobody sends out the thank you notes, or you don't even have something more creative. So, so I agree with you. I think trade shows are still viable, especially in heavy technical industrial categories where people want to see things. Like your stuff is very visible. You can see it and you could appreciate it. But you have to have the game plan, right? To it. And I also think what you said about sometimes if you don't have that kind of budget, show up. Yeah. It's a great networking opportunity. You're going to meet lots of people.
And if you could present a paper at a trade show, it's huge. The only thing better is present a paper and then have the machine you're talking about out on the floor. We've done that a couple of times. It was huge.
Wow. So now as we look out over the next couple of years, nobody can predict, right? And who knows, the volatility is due to, any number of things. There's war breaking out. There's a monkeypox that now we read about, so who knows, right? How do you, as an entrepreneur, as an owner operator, how do you keep a positive perspective on the future? Because it's such an unknown. I'm always curious about that. People who've been able to stick with it all this time.
For me, it's all these people. You got to understand, I give away Rolexes after 10 years. I've given away 32 Rolexes. And so what I'm telling you is that's 320 years people have devoted to me to help me to build this thing at ARC Specialties. And I feel a real sense of gratitude and not really debt, but obligation to keep this thing running. And so if you're not allowed to burn out as an entrepreneur, right? You can burn out and quit your job if you're working for somebody, but if you're an entrepreneur, you got to keep on rolling. And right. I think it's my team and all the hard work that they've devoted to me for all these years that really motivates me at this point.
Wow. So that's kind of like almost more like a cause at that point. Like it's very personal, it's people oriented and so on. So how intentional, Dan, have you had to be to develop the culture you've developed? I mean, how much of it was like that's my plan, we got the culture I laid out to do, or how much of it kind of over time you look back and say, wow, that's a pretty good culture we put together here?
No, it's organic. We hire a lot of people and we fire a lot of people. And the reality is if you don't, you're not being fair to the person that's not working up to your expectations. You're not doing either one of you a favor. And so, we send people along their way, and it might sting at first, but it's good for everybody involved. And so the people that stay kind of embrace the culture. They're willing to put in the hours. They love the technical challenge of these projects, and that's what keeps them rolling. So it's pretty much organic in nature.
Okay, no, that makes a lot of sense, and I think it probably adds to that nimble element that you talked about, because you have people that are really committed to the work, committed to the, maybe the science, to being innovative, to be thinking that way. So you probably have a company that can kind of zig while the market's zagging.
The coolest project we've got right now is we're finally putting robots on offshore drilling rigs. So a drill ship is floating 2 miles above the ocean floor, and you have to assemble 2 miles of riser. And this riser is the conductor tube that goes from the boat all the way to the ocean floor. And it comes in 80-foot lengths and is bolted together with these 50-pound bolts that you got to torque to 20,000 foot-pounds. It's a horrible job for human, great job for a robot. Dangerous, dull, dirty, perfect robot job. And they've been trying to automate this for decades. And but the oil companies, they try to invent their own stuff. Well, there's no reason to do that. We've got 40 years of industrial robotics. And so this wasn't even me. This is the point of my story. This is one of my guys, John Martin. You probably ought to have him on. John had a relationship with one of the fellows at Transocean. Those are the guys that own all the drill ships. And, over a couple of beers or two, they hashed out the details, and we've already built 2 of these systems, and they've been deployed offshore without any input from me at all. All I had to do was support them in the endeavor. How cool is that?
That is very cool. And now this is actually, does it go, the robot functions underwater as well?
No, we're working on the deck of the ship. So,
gotcha.
You got to assemble this riser, which is 10,000 foot long, but it's in 80-foot long pieces. So you have to bolt a piece together, lower it down 80 foot, bolt another one together. And so it's a great robot job. We've already done 3 runs offshore, and for my guys to go offshore, they had to get helicopter training, which means you get in a helicopter, they flip it upside down in the water. Now you're underwater, you got to get out. Anybody that doesn't get out, they fail the test. And so,
okay, that's a tough fail. That's a tough F to pick up, right?
But the point of the story was, I didn't initiate this.
Right.
I have some technical content, but overall, I simply support this effort, and it's going to be huge. And when we presented this at the Offshore Technology Conference, some of the other oil companies showed up and said, wow, I didn't know you're doing this. Because like I said, everybody else trying to invent it from scratch, whereas we're using analogous thinking and applying the technology that we use in factories to a new environment. And it makes us look smart, but in reality, we've done all this before.
Right. So I love the thought of analogous thinking, how you pull it from one industry to another. So Dan, as I think about this, and I think about that nimble, culture you've created, and the ability to move from one lane into another lane. Reason I really wanted to focus on that is because I have found too many companies about your size that feel they can do one thing, they're kind of stuck. And then the market, as the market changes around them, they go up and down with that market. They never respond in a counterpunch. And I think in your story, what really has inspired me, frankly, is like, it's possible, even as a small, mid-sized company, to be flexible and to make changes and still be successful.
What'd you tell your kids? You can be anything you want when you grow up. Okay. We kind of take that lesson to heart. And so we're willing to reach out, stretch out into another area and try it. And I think success builds on success. And so, we'll go and we'll weld rockets and go, hey, that kind of worked, so then it's encouraged our guys to go into other areas. And it's been a lot of fun too. I think some of the best engineers have attention deficit disorder. They need constant stimulation. And the best way to do that is give them new challenges in new arenas with enough similarity that they can take some of their older solutions, which have worked in other environments, and then reapply them. That's the analogous thinking portion of it all.
Wow. Well, Dan, Allford, we could keep going on this because it's a great topic, but thank you so much for stopping by again to Business Growth on Purpose. And if somebody listening wanted to know more about you and your firm, where should they go on the web to find you, to make contact with you?
You can find everything on our website, www.arcspecialties.com, ARCSPECIALTIES. That'll take you to links to our videos, LinkedIn stuff, all sorts of things. Like I said, I've been doing this since '83, so we've amassed quite a bit of knowledge. We're even starting to publish white papers on the technologies that we're developing here. But I really appreciate you having me on. What my hope and dream is, maybe somebody out there will have an interesting problem they need solved, and we'll get in touch.
Absolutely. Dan, thank you so much for stopping by again. Really appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Business Growth on Purpose. If you like the show, hit subscribe and leave us a review to help other people find the podcast. And if you're ready to take the next step in driving intentional growth for your business, come check out what we're doing at valueprop.com. We've developed industry-leading programs and systems to help B2B owners take control of their growth. Until then, thanks for listening to another episode of Business Growth on Purpose.